What's the creepiest thing you have ever seen through your bedroom window? My wife and I were awakened in the middle of the night by what sounded like a loud scream in our backyard. What really freaked us out, though, was there was a silhouette of someone on the drawn window blind. I ran through the house to grab my highest power flashlight, then back to the bedroom. I tried looking out the adjacent window, but didn't see the person even when I used the flashlight. But the person's silhouette was still on the drawn blind. I finally decided to pull the blind back, fully expecting some freak to be on the other side, but no one was there. It turned out to be an owl sitting on the fence, silhouetted by my neighbor's garage light. Story 2. Live in Detroit, right on the border between a safer neighborhood and Detroit, so I tend to see quite a bit from my window. Maybe not creepy, but the scariest would have to be getting an alert for an active shooter, and only to see a guy matching the exact description just wandering around across the street. Story 3. I used to live in a basement apartment in a reasonably nice end of town. Had been there a few months. No issues. One night, late summer, I was laying in bed watching a movie, whilst the dog I had adopted about a month prior was laying on my feet, sleeping. 110 pounds. Senior Roddy X. Window was open, as I normally opened it in the evening for fresh air when the weather was decent. About 10 p.m., I hear nothing, but my dog snaps awake, snarls, flies at the open window, knocks the screen out, and all I hear is, "Oh crap." I look out the window, and there is a screwdriver on the ground. Turns out this guy was trying to break in, using a screwdriver to quietly remove the screen. Moved to an 8th floor unit very, very shortly afterwards. Also got my dog back about an hour later, uninjured. RCMP had gotten a few calls, including mine, about this guy seen at other complexes around my neighborhood, and one picked up my dog along the way. They also caught the guy, and from what I understood, he was wanted on multiple warrants. Story 4. We have an old farm that we let an animal rescue keep rescued, abused horses on. One of the horses, a gigantic Clydesdale named Harvey, had a badly scarred, half-skeletal-looking face. He was a walking nightmare, despite being about as dangerous as a wet saltine. One spring I was sleeping with the window open because it wasn't quite warm enough for the AC. I was woken up by a nuzzling on my leg and assumed it was one of my cats. Then I realized, wait, my cat shouldn't be here. My window's open. So I opened my eyes and there was Harvey, the hell horse, eating my blanket. I sat up and screamed, causing him to startle and rip my window out of my wall. My pulse was elevated. Story 5. My neighbor, older woman, looked right through it, with her hands on the glass to see better, like this. I got out to ask her if she needed help. Her response was, "No, I'm just looking," and she walked away. She probably stood there for 4 hours. My brother saw her standing there earlier. She did this every day for half a year. Turned out she was mentally ill and absolutely harmless, but it creeped me out and made me paranoid for a few weeks. One day she was gone for a few months. She's back now, but doesn't look through my windows anymore. Now she's standing on the ground floor, looking through the door outside. I miss her. Story 6. A very well-to-do looking man who didn't appear to be drunk or high, walking down the street at about 2 a.m. He stopped, got down on his knees, and started having a conversation with the darkness through the grills of a sewer drain. I couldn't hear what he was saying. It appeared to be a two-way conversation. He would pause, nod, gesticulate from time to time. Lasted around 20 minutes. And no, he didn't drop anything down there. I saw the whole thing. I have no explanation. Story 7. My husband and I rented the upper floor of a house, and another couple rented the bottom floor. They usually went to work early and didn't come home until the dinner hour. I was very pregnant and alone at home during the day. I had just gotten out of the shower, towel barely wrapped around me, to see that someone was outside my bedroom window in my side yard. He didn't see me because he was trying to lure the neighbor's dogs to the fence by shaking a bottle of pills at them. He was wearing a large trench coat, underwear, and no shoes. I called 911, kinda unclothed, and they came immediately. Turns out my downstairs neighbors had a house guest, which is fine, I guess, but he really was trying to drug the neighbors' dogs. Who knows why, because they were quiet, sweet dogs. Neighbors were called and they kicked him out immediately and apologized for scaring me. Still, I had a friend come over while I was there alone that day. Story 8. Not seen, but heard what sounded like a young woman pleading and crying. It was a hot summer night in Chicago, so I had my windows open. Please, no, no, oh God, no, followed by a gruff male voice shouting back. I go outside to investigate, holding a hockey stick. I walk up the alley between my house and the neighboring apartment building. Nothing. No lights on, no more voices. A few nights later, I heard the same voices. Please, I'm begging you, don't do it, followed by muffled angry male shouting. I walk out again, hockey stick in hand. Again, nothing. I walk into the neighboring building's backyard to see if someone is there. Nothing. I say, can anyone hear me? In as calm a tone as possible, holding onto the hockey stick for dear life. Nothing. About a week later, in the middle of the day, I heard this voice again. Come on, please, please. I go outside and stand on my front porch. There I see a young teen boy pleading with his dad, who I can clearly hear now. I told you once, I told you again, you don't do your homework. You don't get to play Xbox. The dad walked to his car, Xbox in hand, with this kid screaming bloody murder from the front porch. I wonder if Batman ever had to deal with this. Story 9. My neighbor's bathroom light is on. Obviously, it doesn't sound creepy initially, but to this day, the story still gives me chills. Growing up in my childhood home, we had a neighbor who was very eclectic, but very nice. 99% sure he was on a lot of heavy drugs, and he would leave for weeks or months at a time because he traveled and worked with the circus. He was also a heavy cigarette smoker. He would take baths every night, and I could sometimes faintly hear his loud smoker's cough from my window. One night I saw his bathroom light on, heard him cough a little, then it was quiet. The next night the light was on, but he was oddly quiet this night. No coughing. Same thing the next night, and the next, and the next, and the next. Come to find out, he had suffered a heart attack while he was in the tub, and had been in there dead for almost 5 days. His body was only discovered because his roommate came home and found him. Makes me so sad to think he died all alone. Story 10. I was awakened by this scratching noise to find a creature that I cannot for the life of me recognize as anything I've ever seen at my window, trying to pry it open with tiny paws. I look like a cross between a weasel and a rat, but I will never forget the fur on this creature. It looked like it hadn't cleaned itself in days, and its fur made this creature unrecognizable, to the point that I needed to put my face about 2 feet from it with only a plane of glass between us, just to see if I could recognize it. It clearly wanted in, but thankfully, the apartment window is secure. I recall there being a second one, but it wasn't any more recognizable to me in the slightest. Story 11. I don't know. You would consider this a creepy thing, but it did scare the crap out of me. There was this huge storm passing by during the monsoon season in Arizona. It was like 2 in the morning, and the storm woke me up, so I went to look out my window to see some lighting, or how bad the wind was. The wind picked up the empty trash can in my backyard, and it flew about 20 feet and hit my window. I was standing there watching the storm, looking up at the pitch black sky, when a big plastic trash can came flying at my window. I jumped back so far, I was lucky my window didn't break. If it did, I would have been done for the rest of the night. It poured for a good 5 hours after that. Story 12. When I first moved to Manhattan, we lived in an apartment that faced a light shaft. About 7 feet from my living room window was the next apartment's living room window. As soon as new neighbors moved in, I immediately thought, yeah, one day we're going to be caught looking at each other. Sometime later, I got up in the middle of the night to pee. I glanced out the window and saw the shadowy figure of my neighbor standing and looking out her window in the dark. Gave me chills and freaked me out. From then on, I just don't look out the window when I get up at night. Story 13. Not me, but my mom. She has a sliding glass door that she sleeps with open because my cat used to wake her up wanting in and out of it at all hours of the night. Well, one night she wakes up with two men in her room and a flashlight in her face. She jumps up and realizes it was two cops. They asked her if anyone came in. Apparently someone on the run ran through our backyard while she was asleep with the door open, and luckily enough, the guy didn't notice and ran on. She just leaves her actual door open now. My cat can deal with it. Story 14. Not the creepiest thing I've seen, but heard. So I grew up in an old farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. No neighbors close. We had been having issues with coyotes coming at night and eating our chickens, cats, and even approaching our dogs during broad daylight. Two of them had gotten particularly close to my 3-year-old sister once. My dad had had enough, so he invited his buddies over, and they sat on the porch in the middle of the night, waiting for the coyotes to come so they could shoot them. Sad, I know. My brother and I were listening through the open window, mostly to the conversation of our dad and his friends. Suddenly, the coyotes were close and the guns started firing. Then silence. After about 10 seconds, there was a low, raspy voice that said, "Did you get 'em?" Our entire family was spooked. Like I said, there were no neighbors close. Nobody was ever seen. To this day, we still wonder who or what that was. Story 15. The house my roommates and I were renting was in good shape, but the house next to us was abandoned. There was some kind of family inheritance dispute about which of the 4 grown children of the deceased former resident would get the house, which resulted in none of them living there, but coming by every month and cleaning things up and doing general maintenance. Well, as we were fairly close to the downtown area, the abandoned house was a popular squat for the homeless in the area. We referred to it as the Hobodrome, as almost every night there, you could hear homeless people fighting or screaming at iguanas or whatever they did in there. I've seen it all, but my favorite was a guy taking a dog and her litter of puppies in to get out of the cold. We left a big bag of dog food and some blankets out for them. Story 16. I was up late, sitting in my bed writing an essay for university one night when I saw movement and flashes of light out my window. My bedroom was on the ground floor and was in the corner of the house, so I had 2 large windows, one which faced the road and the other that faced my backyard. My heart started racing, and I quickly switched off my bedside lamp so they couldn't see inside. I crept off the bed to peek out the window, and I couldn't believe my eyes. Probably about 10 fully armed, blacked-out cops were creeping through my backyard holding flashlights. These were definitely not your average street cop. They filtered through my yard and then disappeared from sight. I lived in a middle/upper middle class neighborhood in Canada, so this was pretty shocking. I never did find out what was going on that night. Story 17. I slept on the ground level of the house growing up, and there were bushes outside of my window. The wind would occasionally make their branches bump and scrape my window. So I was used to some noise, but one night it was very loud and repetitive, and it definitely sounded like someone was outside. I opened my blinds and came face to face with like 3 deer munching on the bush. It scared the crap out of me at first because we were eye to eye, only separated by glass, and then I just started laughing. Ha 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 ha. I once heard some rustling on my roof next to my second-story bedroom window that went on for a solid 3 minutes. In a moment of panic, I ripped open my blinds, and right on the other side of my window, maybe a foot away from my face, was a little raccoon who looked just as spooked as I was. Couldn't help but laugh. Story 18. There was a huge tree in the neighbor's backyard. One day there was a guy who was cutting a branch with a chainsaw, and an earthquake started. I saw the chainsaw and man fall, but fortunately they were tied to the tree and nothing bad happened to the man. Holy crap, that's a danger I had never thought of before. We live in a rural area without gas service, so everyone heats with wood. Husband's lived here his whole life, climbs trees and wields chainsaws as easily as can be. I'm still nervous when he falls trees though, because experienced people can still have a tree surprise them by falling weirdly. To imagine doing it in a place where the whole forest might just start shaking at any time? Wow, scary. And now I'm thinking about any risky work. Scaffolders, roofers, power linemen, working in earthquake zones. Low-risk stuff, like picking tree fruit or cleaning gutters or fixing a car with it on a hoist, all become death-defying if an earthquake's possible. This is the one for me, honestly, the post that scared me the most out of the whole thread. To think that thousands, millions of people risk their lives every time they climb a ladder. Spooky AS. Story 19. Not seen, but heard. And then I guess seen? I could have sworn I was dreaming after hearing loud stomping and twigs breaking right outside of my bedroom window. Freaked me out because my bedroom is on the first floor while my parents and sister sleep upstairs. I got up to check it out and make sure it wasn't just a dream. Outside of my window were 3 cop cars and a 4th vehicle, with the driver and passenger doors swung open. The cops brought out flashlights and some beastly-looking German shepherds to try to track these guys down. Sat in my room and let them do their thing while I watched. Apparently, some people stole the car and ditched it right in front of my house. I slept with a big old baseball bat that night and got endless crap from my whole family the next morning. Story 20 lately. Just as I fall asleep, I'll see something that doesn't belong. Whether it be a giant spider crawling on my ceiling towards me or a shadowy figure in the corner. The creepiest was by far the one that happened about a week ago. I was asleep for maybe 20 minutes when something woke me up. The head of my bed is at a window, and for whatever reason, when I woke up, I was on all fours staring at the window when I saw a giant rattlesnake slither in through a hole. There's no hole in my window. I screamed so loud I woke my girlfriend up, and the dog started to bark at me. 910 would not like to experience it again. Story 21. Not my story, but my mother's, that she's told me a few times, and it always creeped me out. My mom shared a bed with her sister when they were younger, a bed directly under a window, and in a room on the first floor. She told me she would see a pair of eyes staring in their window through the blinds at night, watching them sleep. Her sister would always fall asleep before her, so she'd be the only one that saw it. One day, she told my grandparents, but they didn't believe her at first. That is, until my grandpa checked the window and saw the bushes directly beneath it all flattened and stepped on, along with recent footprints all around the window. Story 22. I was renting a house with 2 other friends. My room was on the first floor and had a window looking out over our small backyard and a small vegetable garden. I had called out sick from work for the day, so I was home during a time when nobody else usually is. I looked out the window, and a guy wearing a long, dirty trench coat, unshaven and clearly unshowered, was standing in the garden eating one of our carrots. Homeless guy eating. I'm 6, 2 inches, 220 pounds. Didn't feel threatened and didn't want to discourage the guy from a free meal, so I just kept an eye on him. That's when it got weird. After finishing the carrots, he walked up onto the back porch where he went out of my line of sight. Based on how quickly he was through the locked back door, he knew where our spare key was hidden. Based on the noise from the kitchen, he knew his way around. And based on his posture on the couch, when I walked out of the room pointing my G23 at him, he wasn't expecting anyone home anytime soon. Turns out he had been using our house as his daytime hangout for a while. The dogs didn't even bark at him when he came in. He booked it back out the back door, but was arrested trying the same thing a block away a week later. Story 23. My parents were out bowling, so I was able to stay up past my bedtime. I was about 8 when this happened, and for some reason, I thought it would be fun to watch the stars. About 30 minutes into it, a group of people stop in my driveway and are just staring at my house. So curious, little me just stares back at them, trying to figure out what they're doing. That's when one of them pointed at me and said, "I'll get you." After that, I ran away from the window and went back to watching cartoons in the living room, and that's when I heard the doorknob jiggle. They never tried kicking the door down or anything, but they just sat there messing with the doorknob for like 5 minutes, and then they just left. Story 24. My sister lived on the upper floor of a 2-family home. I was staying there one time while she was out of town, and I opened the window around dusk to see what was outside of the house. Straight in front of me, inside the next house over, about 12 feet across the driveway, was her neighbor, completely unclothed. He was just standing there, and I thought maybe somehow I'd accidentally looked in their bedroom or bathroom, so I shut the curtain again quickly. The house next door was owned by my sister's best friend, and it wasn't until my sister moved over and rented his upstairs apartment years later that I realized that wasn't a bedroom. It was an enclosed hallway leading outside. There was nothing in that hallway. He was just standing there with no clothes facing my sister's place. Story 25. I lived in a finca in rural Spain. There was a village of 7, 10 houses, and we were the only occupied one. The rest were abandoned. I stayed there a lot alone, and I heard some Montana thing climbing the fence and then walking across the gravel in the yard. Other times found shredded rabbits and cats around the perimeter of the house, but the worst one was waking up at 3:30 a.m. to my dog frozen in bed with his ears flat. It took me a few seconds, but then I heard the most guttural, labored breathing I've ever heard just outside my window. It stayed for maybe 2 minutes, then I heard it stagger off. When I checked in the morning, there was mud tracked up the fence, but nothing was trampled. Story 26. Woke up randomly in the middle of the night and was lying awake for a bit. There were some weird scratching noises outside my window, which was directly above my head, but I just dismissed them for a while. I thought it was probably just my cat, but I sat up and pulled the curtain back anyway. There was a guy slowly pulling my window open. We both froze. Then he gapped it up our driveway and away into the night. Called the cops and everything, but they couldn't get prints or anything from the window. And I didn't really get a good look at him. Still no idea what that was about. But now I have safety stays on my windows. Was a bit weird. Story 27. This was a few years ago. I lived in an apartment, and in my room, if you looked out the window, you could see another building that had a lot of offices, and every night I would be able to see a black figure just standing there watching me. It was scary ASS. I tried flashing a light at it a few times to see a person or something, but it was just a black figure, and sometimes it moved around. I freaked out one day, and as soon as the sun would start setting, I would close the blinds, and I did that for a few months, and eventually the black figure left. To this day, I still have no idea what or who that was, and it still creeps me out.